that. Our next presenting company is Aastrom Biosciences, and here today is Nick Colangelo, who's the president and CEO.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here today. I want to begin by just reminding you that we are a publicly traded company, and this presentation contains forward-looking statements, so I'll ask you to refer to our documents on file with the SEC for further information. So Aastrom is a leading regenerative medicine company developing best-in-class cell therapies for patients with significant unmet medical needs. As we talked about this morning, I think everybody in this room understands that regenerative medicine represents the next wave of medical breakthroughs, and cell therapies are poised for tremendous growth. We're developing highly differentiated, best-in-class cell therapies to promote tissue repair and regeneration using our highly scalable and automated GMP manufacturing system. We have what we believe is one of the more robust business models, certainly in the autologous space. We're targeting areas of significant unmet medical need, specifically severe chronic ischemic cardiovascular diseases. These areas represent substantial commercial opportunities, and we have a platform that allows us to manufacture product with low cost of goods sold to drive profitability. And we think we represent a compelling investment opportunity. We have multiple upcoming shareholder value drivers and strong upside potential at our current valuation. So I won't spend much time on this, but as I mentioned earlier, the cell therapy space has reached an inflection point and is poised for tremendous growth. There's multiple products being sold globally in regulated markets, new product approvals happening in greater volumes in the past 5 years than before, hundreds of clinical trials by hundreds of companies around the world in a multitude of areas. And the industry reached more than $1 billion in revenue last year. And so there's been strong growth through 2013, projected to grow stronger than the rest of the pharmaceutical and biotech industry going forward. And importantly, cardiovascular cell therapy products will be leading the way over the next decade. But despite these advantages or advances, the industry is still operating as a net loss or on a net loss as a whole. And so we're very focused on our business model going forward. So Aastrom, as I mentioned, is a clear leader in the cell therapy space. We have a technology platform with proven capability to expand multiple cell populations from cord blood and bone marrow for clinical applications. So we've expanded dendritic cells for vaccines, hematopoietic stem cells for bone marrow transplants, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes for oncology applications, and our current lead product, XmilACell-T, utilizes expanded populations of M2-like macrophages as well as mesenchymal stromal cells, or MSCs, to promote tissue repair and regeneration. So XmilACell-T is a highly differentiated product. It's the only cell therapy that contains a mixture of cell types, including M2-like macrophages that are well known to play a role in tissue repair and regeneration. We start with a small volume of a patient's bone marrow. We reduce cells that don't play a role in tissue repair and regeneration, like red blood cells, granulocytes, and lymphocytes, and we expand monocyte, macrophage, and MSC populations that are known to play a role in tissue regeneration. So what these cells do is they have a wide range of biological activities that promote tissue repair and regeneration, both through the paracrine effects of their secreted factors as well as the direct cell activities of the cells. So both these populations, the mesenchymal stromal cells and M2-like macrophages, secrete high levels of potent antifibrotic and anti-inflammatory factors like IL-10 and IL-1 receptor antagonists, factors involved in extracellular matrix remodeling like matrix metalloproteinases and their inhibitors, as well as potent angiogenic factors like VEGF and FGF. So it creates a cocktail of cytokines and growth factors that promotes healing and tissue repair in the microenvironment. But these cells also have direct cell activities, so MSCs clearly play a role in remodeling of extracellular matrix, but it's the macrophages that have a substantial biological effect as well. So these cells are phagocytic cells, so they clear away apoptotic cells and cellular debris to dampen immune and inflammatory responses. And the particular phenotype in our product also plays a role in cholesterol homeostasis. So it's this combination of the secreted factors and paracrine effects, as well as the direct cell activities that lead to the therapeutic effects we've seen with the product, which is resolving inflammation and promoting angiogenesis and tissue repair and regeneration. We have a comprehensive patent portfolio consisting of multiple U.S. and international patents that cover both the technology platform and our therapeutics, and importantly, a composition of matter patent for Exmilus-LT, our lead product, that protects the product through 2029. So this is a broad platform, many potential applications. We've demonstrated clinical proof of concept in cardiac, vascular, and bone disorders, and as I mentioned, our current focus is on the treatment of severe chronic ischemic cardiovascular diseases. We have clinical activities ongoing in 3 areas. Our lead program, for which we have an orphan designation in the United States, is for the treatment of advanced heart failure due to ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy, or DCM. We believe we've focused a lot of our internal resources on this program. We believe it's a great opportunity for the company, significant unmet need, big commercial opportunity, and a potentially streamlined path to commercialization given our orphan indication. Our second area of clinical development is in critical limb ischemia, which is the most severe form of peripheral artery disease. We're completing the REVIVE study around the end of this month, and we should have data from that study in the second quarter. And our third area of clinical development is in craniofacial reconstruction, or bone disorders, where we have a series of 3 NIH-sponsored studies that we're conducting in partnership with the University of Michigan. Results from the first of those studies was published last year in Cell Transplantation and demonstrated that Exmilus-LT accelerates bone regeneration in patients with craniofacial defects. So another demonstration of the clinical utility of the product in repairing tissue in patients. So as I mentioned earlier, we're keenly focused on developing a robust business model. Products that have launched in this area have not tended to do very well commercially or from a business perspective. So we believe we're hitting all the points that we need to build a successful business. We're addressing, as I mentioned, areas of significant unmet medical need that support intervention with a cell therapy when patients have no other options. These are compelling commercial opportunities with strong reimbursement potential. We've demonstrated with Exmilus-LT the potential for significantly greater efficacy versus the current standard of care in these indications. And again, our technology platform allows us to manufacture product with a low cost of goods sold to drive profitability. So those are the elements that we're focused on. And again, when products have not been successful commercially, it's because they fail on one or more of these parameters. So we'll look at our lead program in the context of those factors. So heart failure represents, as I'm sure you've heard a number of times today, a significant unmet medical need and a growing public health problem. There's about 6 million patients that suffer from heart failure in the United States, with about 600,000 new cases each year. The current medical cost to treat these patients is around $25 billion, and it's expected to grow to nearly $80 billion by 2030, based on an aging population and the high cost of treatment alternatives for these advanced heart failure patients, including placement of left ventricular assist devices and heart transplantations, which go anywhere from a couple $100,000 to north of $1 million to treat each patient at that stage. So dilated cardiomyopathy is a leading cause of heart failure and heart transplantation. It basically is a reduced blood flow to the heart, so the heart muscle weakens, the chambers enlarge, the heart walls thin, and the heart basically cannot pump blood sufficiently throughout the body. About 60% of dilated cardiomyopathy is of ischemic origin, and again, there are very limited treatment options for these patients. So as we look at the disease progression in the patients in the U.S., of those 6 million patients, about 1.8 million of them are advanced heart failure patients who are characterized as class 3 or 4 New York Heart Association patients, and a subset of those patients are refractory to further medical therapy. So these are patients that have maxed out their prescription drugs, their antihypertensives, beta blockers, et cetera, their medical devices, so they've had stents, bypass surgeries, and they're really no longer candidates for further revascularization procedures. So they're on the path to either LVAD, heart transplantation, or death. And so we think this is a very well-defined patient population at a well-defined point in disease progression that justifies intervention with cell therapy. We think it's a great commercial opportunity. As I mentioned, not only is there a great growing patient population, but we have a leading position with an opportunity to be first to market in the treatment of ischemic DCM or advanced heart failure due to ischemic DCM. We're the only company in the field that has an orphan indication in this regard, which again, we think can provide a streamlined path to commercialization. Also, as I mentioned, the options for these patients are horrendously expensive, and therefore we think we have a really strong pharmacoeconomic rationale to support premium pricing. And again, those are core elements of a successful business model. We also think we've demonstrated the potential for Exmilus-LT to significantly improve patient outcomes in these indications. We've conducted 2 phase 2A studies to date. The primary objectives of those studies were first and foremost to demonstrate that Exmilus-LT is safe in patients with dilated cardiomyopathy, and then look at different delivery methods, surgical versus catheter, and different patient populations, ischemic DCM versus non-ischemic patients. So as you'd expect with an autologous therapy from a safety perspective, we've demonstrated that the product is well tolerated in patients with DCM, and so have not seen any issues from a safety perspective. And as you'd expect, catheter administration is better tolerated by patients, so we quickly focused on catheter administration as well. When you look at our catheter study, as we broke down the patients into ischemic versus non-ischemic patients, you can see in the left 2 bars on the graph that major adverse cardiovascular events, and again, these are the registration endpoints in these cardiovascular studies, were reduced in patients with ischemic DCM, and there was a more modest effect in the non-ischemic patient population. When we looked across both of our phase 2 studies, you see that subjects treated with Exmilus-LT in the ischemic groups were less likely to have MACE events, so there was a 45% reduction in the number of patients having a MACE event at 12 months. And then when you look again across the studies at the average number of MACE events, there was a reduction in the average numbers as well that equated to a 61% reduction in the average number of MACE events in that group. So on these registration quality endpoints, we've demonstrated strong trends in these initial smaller studies. We also look at secondary endpoints related to both structure, function, and symptoms. And what we saw was that there was nearly 100% of patients that had an improvement in New York Heart Association class, generally from class 3 and 4 to improvement to class 1 and 2. We saw a statistically significant improvement in performance in the 6-minute walk test. And then we saw improvements in quality of life as well as measured by the Minnesota Living with Heart Failure questionnaire. So again, whether it was the registration MACE endpoints or the secondary symptomatic and functional endpoints, we saw all the trends supporting moving forward with this study, and then it obviously influenced the design of our current phase 2B study, which we think, as you heard earlier today, what folks are looking for is robust phase 2 data, and we think this represents one of the more robust phase 2 programs in the space. So this is a registration quality, multi-center randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study designed to enroll and treat 108 patients at more than 30 sites in the US and Canada. We've activated more than 30 sites. We're looking at the same patients we did in the earlier studies, so they're advanced heart failure patients, class 3 and class 4. And again, we'll be looking at registration endpoints, so MACE events, all-cause deaths, cardiac hospitalizations, and emergency room visits to treat acute decompensated heart failure. And of course, looking at all the secondary endpoints at 3, 6, 9, and 12 months as well. So a very robust study that we think will certainly guide our efforts as we move into phase 3. Just wanted to make a quick note about our CLI program as well. So critical limb ischemia, again, is the most advanced form of peripheral artery disease, affects more than 10 million Americans, it's basically reduced blood flow to the lower extremities, debilitating leg pain, non-healing wounds and gangrene, amputations, and death. So a very high mortality rate and a very significant unmet medical need here with, again, very few treatment options, basically revascularization procedures and palliative care to treat the pain. Again, we've demonstrated the potential for Exmilus-LT in this indication in our phase 2b RESTORE study, where we saw significant improvements in time to, or substantial improvements in amputation-free survival rates and so on, that represented a 61% reduction in relative risk. So as I mentioned, we do have data from our current REVIVE study that we expect to be available in the second quarter of this year. So the last element of a successful business model is obviously being able to generate product or manufacture a product with a low cost of goods sold. We have an industry-leading, highly automated and scalable GMP manufacturing system. We basically take the bone marrow, it's shipped overnight to our facilities where the product is manufactured in a single-use disposable bioreactor cassette that's part of an automated, fully closed GMP manufacturing system. This is highly scalable, and certainly at launch scales even, we'll have cost of goods sold less than 10% that will help drive profitability. So we have a number of upcoming value-creating milestones related to our clinical programs. We expect to publish data from those first 2 studies in about the middle of this year. We'll complete enrollment in the Excel DCM study by the end of the year and have data about 12 months thereafter. As mentioned, we have last patient, last visit in our REVIVE study sometime at the end of this month or early April, and we expect to have study results before the end of Q2. Same thing with the craniofacial studies going on at the University of Michigan. We'll complete enrollment mid-year and have data about a year after. So just quickly, from a financial perspective, we engaged in a number of initiatives last year to strengthen our financial position and really be in a position to support our R&D programs and our corporate strategic objectives going forward. So we ended the year, our cash burns about $15 to $16 million a year. We ended February with about $11 million in cash. We put new facilities in place with Lincoln Park Capital and existing ATM facilities. So we certainly feel like we've strengthened the company and have the ability to move forward with our programs. And again, feel like we're a pretty compelling investment opportunity given our current valuations. So thank you for your time and attention. And I was only a few minutes over.